Syrian civil war has been going on now for nearly 5 years. It's claimed at least 250,000 lives and more than 4 million people have fled the country, triggering shockwaves across Europe. David Davis, the Conservative MP, has just come back from Damascus and a face-to-face meeting with President Bashar al-Assad. And he joins me now. Good morning.
Morning.
David Davis, clearly not President Assad. However, you have
I hope so.
You have been speaking to this man who is regarded around the world as one of the most bloodthirsty and evil dictators going. How did you find him?
Well, you've got to start with the fact that he does oversee a regime which murders and tortures prisoners and carries out barrel bombing. He was polite, courteous. We had warned him before we arrived that we were going to be very frank with him, and his opening words were, "Please be blunt." So we were.
So you asked him about the barrel bombs and the torture and so forth, and how did he respond?
In particular, my colleague Adam Holloway was incredibly fierce about it. He sort of sidestepped the barrel bomb argument, but on the torture and killing of prisoners, he tried to claim that that was down to enemy propaganda, as it were. He said, you know, our opponents are very good at online propaganda. Now, of course, that may be true to some extent, but the simple truth is 2 years ago, a British citizen, Dr. Assad Khan, was tortured, we think, and killed in their custody, and there's other evidence to indicate it's still going on. So other ministers in his government said, oh, put it down to revenge and their lack of control. But the simple truth is it's still there.
Now, of course, his troops are in Palmyra now, and they're moving forward again, thanks to President Putin's intervention. Did he talk to you about that? And do you think he feels safe as a result of President Putin doing what he did?
Absolutely. I asked him about Putin, because I was quite interested in why Putin downscaled what they were doing. I mean, the Russian intervention, you're quite right, actually completely put the Syrian army back on its feet. And so I asked him why he downscaled it. He said, because Russia was being criticised for stalling the talks, taking away the incentive for him to negotiate. But then there was a line that came out of it, almost as a throwaway line. He said, but Putin said, we will not let you lose.
Wow.
Which for me was, in fact, in some ways, the most important phrase of the entire visit, because that actually defines what the outcomes are going to be. If the Russians will not let them lose, then there are two possible outcomes. I mean, the jihadist victory, which will be a disaster in my view, by the way, the jihadist victory is not on the cards, but either a negotiated outcome or a Syrian victory is on the cards. It
wasn't long ago we were being told of 70,000 moderate Syrian fighters taking on the regime by the government. Any sign of that at all?
No. We talked to a lot of other people. Where we could, we talked to people like NGOs and journalists both inside Damascus and in Beirut. And the most telling comment was from an NGO, very good NGO leader in Damascus, who said that there is nobody that the West would recognise as a moderate amongst the various sorts of jihadists and so-called freedom fighters.
So it's an unappetising choice between sticking with Assad and the Russians on the one hand and allowing complete turmoil of extremist groups on the other. Is there any other way forward?
Well, there is a negotiated outcome. The reason I went in the first place was because Europe's biggest two problems are massive security problems, 1,000 jihadists a year arriving in Europe, and tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of refugees. Both of those go back to the Syrian conflict. The longer it goes on, the longer negotiation goes on, the worse that will be. We won't be able to cope with it. So outcomes, either a Syrian government victory, which will take a long time, or a negotiated outcome. At the moment, with Syria just under the aegis of the Russians, who are not going to stop them torturing, who are not going to stop them killing their prisoners. So it seems to me the West has got to get a card in this game. And I think one of the most important things the West could do is draft, as it were, a Marshall Plan for Syria, rebuild Syria. Syria used to be the Germany of the Levant. Breadbasket, pharmaceuticals, textiles, you name it. But it then allows us to say to them, you want this? You've got to negotiate properly. You've got to do what we want, which is create a civilised regime. I mean, Syria is fascinating.
Do you take the view that Assad eventually must go?
I think the other thing this NGO head said was if Assad stood for election tomorrow, he would win. When he stood a few years ago, they've had a general election this week, which is a bit of a farce, frankly. But when he stood a few years ago, he got 63% of the vote. Now he'd probably get more, because everybody's terrified of the alternative. Not because they like him, but they're terrified of the alternative. So we've got to leave that to. I think we'll leave that to the Syrian people.
So you think the West should put Assad out, off the table for the moment? If you were in the Foreign Office, you'd be talking to Putin.
I wouldn't make that a red line at the moment. I'd say we want a democratic, civilized state. At the moment, you've got a repressive state with a civilized society. It's really weird, a liberal society. Churches alongside mosques, women not wearing veils, you name it. You want to maintain that peace whilst rebuilding Syria. So yes, I'd talk to Putin. I'd talk to the Assad government. And bear in mind, this was here, by the way, before Bashar Assad took over. His father created the regime we have now.
Indeed.
So the machinery is important too.
It's been there for a long time, absolutely.
So you have to sort that out too.
Very, very interesting. Since you're a leading enthusiast for the Leave side of the argument, let me ask you about Ken Clarke's comment this week. The Prime Minister wouldn't last 30 seconds if we vote to Brexit.
No, you asked me if I agree with that.
Yes.
No, I don't. Look, if we vote for Brexit, then it's clear that David Cameron can't lead that bit of his government's activities. He'd have to appoint
the renegotiation.
The renegotiation, exactly. He'd have to appoint somebody who the public had faith in, who his own party had faith in, but most importantly, who believed in the negotiation. If he did that, I don't see any reason why he shouldn't go on. I mean, listen.
So what kind of person we're talking about? Somebody who's been on the Leave campaign side.
I mean, there are a number of
Boris or a Gove, or somebody who's been in the Foreign Office, David.
Oh, go away! Let us. You're referring to me. Let us confine ourselves to the plausible, shall we?
Okay. But if he brought in a Gove or a Johnson to do the renegotiation, do you think he could then remain as Prime Minister?
I think so. I think if he made it plain that he was going to give those people enough power to do the job.
David Davis, thank you very much indeed for joining us.